Hello, fellow bookish people. It's me, one of the slow mammoths, still trundling along here in April. If you don't know what I'm talking about, this was a part of the March of the Mammoths. Read along in March to read one book of over 800 pages long. And the book I picked was Kristin Lavransdatter by Sigrid Undset, a book series of, well, it was published as 3 books in the 1920s by Sigrid Undset in Norwegian. She won the Nobel Prize, and they cited this book in particular in that. It's a book following Kristin Lavransdatter through the entire span of her life, and I've gotten to the end of it. We're in the middle. It's April the 15th when I'm filming this. April 15th, 8 o'clock at night. The light is still there, and I figured, what the heck, I'd come outside and take advantage of that light and the chirping of the birds to finish off this lovely, lovely, amazing book that left me crying at the at the end of it. Yeah. Yeah. So, like, I don't know. I've been reading this in the sections that it was published in. It was published as The Wreath in 1920, then The Wife in 1921, and finally The Cross in 1922. And that's the section I guess I'm sort of talking about today. I'm not going to talk about it in too great a detail because it's the very final section of a book that I would really hope that you'd want to go out and pick this up and read it. I don't do that a lot. A lot of times I'm like, oh, people will choose what they want to choose, and you will choose what you want to do after listening to me if you choose to listen to me. But yeah, this is to rush to the end. It's a book that I would hardly recommend that anyone would read. So I left off with the wife section, which was much about Kristin Lavransdatter. She, starting in the first book, she had taken up with the wrong guy. She'd gone off with the wrong guy, married him against her father's wishes, left another guy, Simon Dare, behind in that. But of course, the wonderful thing about this book is that it's all about sort of the ramifications of your decisions. Sometimes your selfish decisions, sometimes just the decisions that are of your desire. And a really good thing about that book is that the main person who was like ends up feeling all of the ramifications and the guilt and the anguish about that. I mean, that's Kristin Lavransdatter, but the shame and the guilt comes from within herself, and you could say that's internalized oppression of a kind of a Christian society. But it's also just about the thing of being a person with selfish desires and and acting on those desires, and then having to live with the results, and whether they're right or wrong. I mean, she never for a moment, I believe, regrets her decision to go with Ireland, despite how disastrous it is and how much pain it brings to her. But she's also quite regretful of the pain that it brings to the people around her. And that isn't the only thing of just, it's basically of her having to live her life in this particular setting, which is very, very much it's a religious setting. She is probably the most pious religious character in here, even though she is deeply flawed and deeply, she would be the first one to call herself a sinner. She is not a saint by any matter. There's a very dramatic scene at the end of this book where she says to some people, who are about to do something really fucking horrible, that, no, I am one of you. I am not a holy sister. I am one of you. And I think that's part of the power of this book, is that she is the struggling person in this book, and she struggles. Spoiler alert! Struggles right to the end. Now, in these sections, we see continuing basically kind of estrangements from Simon Dare, this man who she kind of gave up for Ireland to become his wife, and her estrangement from her, but there's also troubles with Ireland. And we go through all that, and I mean, this is a book where you get. I think I said in the past bits of just like how much you get into the other people's around Kristin's point of view, and I mean, a key note here would be the character of Simon Dare, this man who loved and still does love Kristin, and him coming forward to her, and like this is her as like an older and in the time of the book, an older woman, and saying, from his point of view, going, so fair and graceful, she had never seemed to him more beautiful, and all of a sudden he felt as if he had somehow been lifted up and were swimming in the light. He let out a long breath. Suddenly he thought it was simply good to be alive. A rich and golden bliss washed over him. She was his own sweet love. All the troubled and bitter thoughts he had seemed nothing more than half-forgotten foolishness. My poor love, if I could only comfort you, if only you could be happy again, I would gladly give up my life if it would be to help you. Oh yes, he could see that her lovely face looked older and more careworn. She had an abundance of fine little wrinkles under her eyes, and her skin had lost its delicate hue. It had become coarser and tan from the sun, but she was pale under the tan, and yet to him she would surely always be just as beautiful. Her big gray eyes, her fine, calm mouth, her round little chin, and her steady, subdued demeanor were the fairest he knew on earth. I could go along reading. This is a translation by Tina Nunnally, which I think it's a gorgeous translation. It seems to me, from the Norwegian, which obviously I can't read, but I'm being bewitched in this book by the writing, and these sections. And the real bastard thing with this book is you will have these moments of pure bliss, which everyone does have in their moments of life, but very often these moments of pure bliss are then kind of visited with those terrible reversals, and then everything goes back to crap, and everybody is bitter and hates each other, and it's just like that. There's this roller coaster of a life, but it's done. The great thing of it being a Mammoth book is that it's done over these long stretches of life, so it's not unnatural. It's not like we're seesawing back and forth. It's like, no, this is an entire life where you have moments of great joy and beauty, and you also have moments of just utter despair. And I mean, we get into the second section, debtors, and everything really starts getting, you wonder if the debtor is just like, you've had this life, and life gives and life takes away, or the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, I guess, which, I'm not a religious guy, but I've been really sucked into this religious world. So, that section happens. I'm not going to talk about it. And then we have the cross, the final section, the cross in this section, which is the cross, where you get Kristin Lavransdatter as an old woman, as somebody who she talks about, like, the world is like an alehouse where when you don't have anything more to spend, they just throw you out the door. And, part of that is it's her reacting to what has happened to her, and in her bleakest moments, though she's someone who also gets great comfort from the religion, from a worldview of there is an all-forgiving grace, whatever that means. I'm not. Don't come to me for that. But she. It's one of these books where there's been a constant motif in these books of, it's Norway, and it's like there's these giant high peaks, which, I mean, I live in British Columbia, which is high peaks, but I mean, then you get Norway, you get the fjords, and you get just looking, it's like everyone's always like, you step out of the thing and you're just looking way down and everything. You can see the specks and you can see everyone. And it's this visual motif that's kind of gone through all the books. But in this section, you get the idea of the cross. That's also a vista, and it's the vista of Christ looking down on the cross, from the cross, at all the sinners, at all the people spread below him, and just this all-encompassing, caring view that happens even in this very harsh, very brutal world. I love this book because we start off with Kristin as this selfish young girl with passions, but is very self-centered. And I mean, she goes through a lot of the book very self-centered, to the point of when the worst is happening, she forgets about her own children and pushes them away, which, you know, should make her despicable, but makes her all the more human and relatable. But the great thing about this book is that I've been with her all the way through, from being a young child to being like, she's an old woman, and it's like I myself have aged. It's like, how can I be an old man? Actually, I'm older than Kristin Lavransdatter at the end of this book. She's like nearing 50. I am 50. So that's kind of that's one of those jarring things of like, how can she be old? I've known her. I've been her for a child. She is still that young girl that I met at the beginning of the book. But it's like, no, she is a living person to me, Kristin Lavransdatter. She's so it's one of these wonderful things. If you've gotten to travel with her and mature with her, or share in her insights and in her views as she's gone from being a child and being a daughter to becoming a mother, and having all these children, and kind of and realizing things like, realizing, because like she has so much bitterness towards Erland, especially in the latter points, but realizing that, he's that for all his faults, he was someone who never held kind of rancor for anyone. He never held that rancor, which is perhaps why they actually were such a couple, because she's held hell of a lot of rancor. Has been a very unpleasant woman through good hunks of this book. Or just the fact that, like, she's always she's been kind of like, oh God, my sons, they're all basically going to become little mini Erlands and going to be over rambunctious and going to be reckless. But she realizes kind of at the end, it's like, well, no, I wouldn't have been happy if they'd been meek little doorstops. So and just like kind of the wisdom that comes to her at the end of her life, which is not something that happens to everyone, but she is this remarkable woman. Yeah, and the end of this book had me crying. I think his book had me crying because I had to part from Kristin. It's like a person. It's like I felt like I'm losing a person, even though I guess I can flip to the beginning of the book and start over again, which is more than you can say with some of your relationships, other than you can say that people that have passed in my life, I can remember them. I mean, here's Kristin, and I guess here's Kristin in my head. Thank you, Jason, for this book. And goddamn, Jason, when the thing that happens in this book, which I should have realized was going to happen in this book, happened, I was like, oh my God damn it! Especially when it's happening at the very end, it's like, God damn it, I guess. But forgive me for that. I guess I will say in this context, forgive me for that. Thank you, Jason, for making me cry. Jason of Old Blues Chapter and Verse recommended this book in his top 10s, and he flashed it out in his March of the Mammoths announcement, because Lukas and Alex at Big Al's Books hosted this readathon, and I'm not a guy who reads a lot of big books, or they come along every once in a while, and this was a really great reminder of just how rewarding and how immersive, and I have a new person in my life, Kristin Lavransdatter, that is going to be there, which is it's not a book, it's a bloody person in the 14th century who I want to hug, and boy, I mean, probably back away from and be troublesome, but it's just such a real person. So yes, that is Kristin Lavransdatter. I recommend that if you have not read this, that you should go out and read it. Because a big strong guy who's actually a big blubbering softy like myself really got sucked into this book and was crying at the end. I don't know if you'll cry. I don't know if you'll just really enjoy it and be immersed in a great literature. She won the Nobel Prize, and I have to say, this is like, wow, okay, if all Nobel Prize winners were like this, it's like, holy crap, we'd have a lot of great literature in the world. All right. That is my final check-in on the March of the Mammoth here in the middle of April. More videos later. Good night.